Okay, everyone, we will call to order our regular meeting of council. And before we start today, I do just want to let everyone know that we have Councillor Haggard participating by Zoom. And so just for the public's awareness and for Councillor Haggard's awareness, our procedures bylaw do require that any member of council who is joining virtually does have to vote out loud. So although it does seem somewhat awkward sometimes, it is required that on every vote, Councillor Haggard will voice her vote. So just so that everyone understands why that's happening. So we will recognize that we are holding our meeting today on the unceded traditional territories of Hupachesit and Sishat First Nations. And we do have an agenda in front of us. Are there any late items to add from councillors? Councillor Patola.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. This is a late item. I'd asked it to be added and just hasn't quite gotten there yet, so it's a late on time item. This is with regards to a Fortis grant that they're giving out to local charities and not-profit organizations in various communities. And to be nominated for the grant, it is required to be a member of UBCM. So I'd like to bring that forward.
Thank you. We will add that as item J1E. Any other items to add from members of council? Seeing none, any items to late items from our corporate officer?
No late items, Madam Mayor.
Thank you. Then would somebody like to move approval of our agenda with the additional item? So moved. Moved by Councillor Solda, seconded by Councillor Douglas. Seeing no comments on the motion, all in favor?
Yes.
Thank you, carried. Great work, Councillor Haggard. Got that voting right away. Okay, we'll move on to adoption of minutes. Today we have the minutes from the special meeting held March 20th, 2023 at 4 p.m. and the special meeting held at 12 p.m. that day, and the regular meeting of council held at 2 p.m. on April 11th, 2023.
Move to adopt.
Move to adopt by Councillor Solda, seconded by Councillor Patola. Any comments on the minutes? Seeing none on the motion, all in favor?
Yes.
Carried, thank you. We'll move on to public input period, and this is an opportunity for members of the public to address council on topics of relevance to City Council. We accept a maximum of 4 speakers for up to 3 minutes each. Would anybody like to speak today? I know we have Mr. Meba first, if you want to come forward.
Is there a letter that was received from our group about that? And we had a total of 34 signatures on the letter.
Thank you. Through Madam Mayor, there has been a letter received, yes, and it will be circulated to council.
Okay, great. Yeah, I'd like to start out by introducing Kelly and Michelle Butt, who are sitting at the back. They're here because they have a special interest in this issue. Their son, Daniel, was killed at that intersection 5 years ago. Anyway, I understand that you visited this issue about a week ago, and that a motion was passed. And what we wanted to do with our letter was just highlight this to you, this issue, because it is a new council. It's the first time that I've been here speaking to you. And we wanted to let you know that when this issue was first visited a couple years ago with the engineering staff, including ICBC, they presented their plan for this, and we basically went along with it because we didn't feel that we had much option. They said, okay, there's 3 choices here. You know, this is our favorite. You know, how does that sound to you? And we said, well, I guess it's okay. It's not really what we want. What we want is for the left turn lane going on to Dunbar. If you're heading south towards Quality Foods, we'd like that lane to be eliminated. It's a constant hazard to cyclists in particular, but I understand that that pedestrians also are at risk there. I'd like to just read one letter. This is from Kevin Head, who is an experienced cyclist. He and his wife are both heavy-duty cyclists. They take their daughter on the bikes as well. She's like 2 or 3 years old. Anyway, he says, "Hi, John. Please add my name to your list of supporters. I've had several close calls at 10th and Dunbar, including 2 near head-on collisions, me on my bike heading north down the dip, and a car heading south turning left on Dunbar. I consider that intersection and the relatively narrow 10th Avenue Bridge to be so dangerous that we just ride our bikes on the sidewalk when we're with our young daughter, Isabel. And this is just a representative of many comments that I've heard about from different people on that intersection, including myself. I haven't actually had any close calls, but I use that road probably an average of at least 2 times a week. And many people use it a lot more than that. We are pleased that you're moving on this because, as I said earlier, it's been 2 years, and I had almost given up. Like I thought, well, I guess it's just on some back burner, and I'm not sure where we go from here. But you are looking at it, and I think that's a great step forward. So I just wanted to let you know that we're fully supportive of your making changes to that. I really like the green lines. You see those in many cities, and I think they do bring the driver's attention to the fact that there's bikes there. I just had a conversation with Mike this morning, and we talked about the idea of putting a sensor in that would, that when a bike goes by, it would trip the sensor, and there would be some type of sign or some type of an alert for drivers that there's a cycle in the lane coming down the hill. So that's one option. There are probably a lot of issues involved in making these changes. I was talking to the city engineer, and he said that there are plans in phase 2, but that there isn't funding yet. But we certainly just wanted to put it before you that turning lane is a very big risk, and ultimately, I think, and a number of other people that I've talked with feel that Dunbar should be closed. Dunbar should be a service road only for those people that live on that block. And you see this in many other cities. You can't, it'll say no exit, and that people will just get used to going up and using Argyle and coming down 10th at the 4-way or whatever else is planned for that intersection. Anyway, that's about all I have to say, and I'd like to thank you for your time. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Maba. And I want to just, again, express our condolences to the Butt family, and thank you for being here today. This is not the point in the agenda where we will make any motions, but I did just want to update, because you are here, that council gave preliminary early approval at our last meeting to this project to proceed. However, and that was just through the budget process. So I am going to ask for a report on the projects, just so that everyone on council, because it has gone on over the course of a couple of years, can get properly up to date and make sure that this is the proper scope of project, and there could be changes following that report. So just really appreciate you being here today, and know that it is top of mind for us. And we know that very much this project was brought forward for cyclist and pedestrian safety, and we want to make sure that's not lost in the project moving forward. So thank you. For public input period next, we will go to Mr. Anderson.
Thank you. Just won't take my 3 minutes, I guarantee. I've been reading the report a couple of times, but you get older and it takes more than just 2 times to read some of these documents, and I'm not concerned about that. It's very concerning. When this was brought up a number of months ago, and I do have all the dates, I just don't have them.
Sorry, Mr. Anderson, could you let us know what report you're speaking to?
Yes, I will get that. Thank you for correcting me again. I'm concerned about the code of ethics. When it was first brought up a number of months ago, I stood up and said, look, I was an advocate for this. I thought it was a very positive thing, especially considering that we didn't have one. I was surprised at the fact that we didn't have anything in writing regarding code of ethics. I read the presentation that was put out on the guidelines, And they addressed 3 items. It was basically how people interacted with each other, mayor, council as one, senior staff members, I would say that was predominantly what they were referring to, and the public. And my concern that I raised at that time was, and the question I asked, is there going to be an avenue when you were looking into writing this conduct for the public to have input? I'm not sure what the decision was, but talking to people, I said that it was the indication, yes, and that there was going to be a committee of the whole or something set up to do that, and I guess that's tomorrow after the fact, because recommendations have been made by the committee of whole to adopt the current proposal. But I don't want to make comments on that because I need to read it again. I'm still in favor of a code of conduct, but I think in the first 2 readings that I've done of it, we're missing one element. We direct things that will certainly be a benefit to the mayor and council, and certainly would be a benefit to, let's say, the CEO, but any director. And certainly in the last 3 years, from 1920, February 2020 to February 20 of this year, 3 years. And I can't see anything, and I may be wrong, but you can't ask questions here, so I'm going to reserve some of my comments to, or some of my issues to the question period. And I'll try and make it brief because I want to make sure that I can comprehend everything that's in here properly. But I don't see too much issues in here that have included public input. This is in a lot of ways attacking our right to provide input to our elected officials, and mostly in the fact that we can only talk about things that are on the agenda. We went through that with Mr. Rutan. I stood up and talked about that and said it was an attack on democracy, and that still is today. There's many issues that the public want to address to their council, their elected people. And it was Chris Alberni and I was caught by surprise, and I stood there for about a minute with not saying much. I remember that. I don't mind that, that's fine. Old age. And I thought I'd leave it until the following meeting. The following meeting, Mr. Alberni put a motion on the floor to allow discussions on any issue that was relevant to the council. And it passed. I don't know by how many people, but it passed. There was at least 4 people. And so there's also an issue on this paper that says you have 4 options.
Mr. Anderson, your 3 minutes is up, so if you could just wrap up.
I'll wrap up. There is an option here that says, it's crazy. They say you can, they want you to come up with an agreement within 6 months. And then it goes on to say, if you decide not to have a code of conduct, you don't have to have it. Makes no sense to me, but nevertheless, that's the way it works. And you can leave it until the next election. And I'm starting to think, but discussions will play this out, that it's maybe an option now, even though I support a code of ethics, that it might be the best solution to leave it until the next
Thank you.
election. Thank you for extending my time.
No problem. And again, that meeting is tomorrow night. Council has not passed anything, and there is a suggested motion on the agenda of tomorrow night. However, there is a recommendation has not been made by the committee yet, so you'll have opportunity to provide input tomorrow.
Recommendation by the committee of the
Thank you.
whole, which is a council, to the council.
That has not happened yet. Tomorrow is when that will happen. Thank you. Are there any other members of the public who would like to speak today? Okay. No delegation, so we'll move on to unfinished business. Item number 1, we have the financial plan Q&A summary. So there is a bit of updated information there. Are there any questions of staff at this point? Councillor Patola and then Councillor Solda.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'm going to raise this now, and perhaps it might be more appropriate to raise it later, but I don't want to miss my chance. I have a question with regards to items 27, 210, which is referred to in the, 27, 215, which is referred to in the questions. I'm not sure which question it's referred to on, but this is the amount of monies being set aside for the trail project. And I just wanted to make a comment with regards to that, in that I noticed that the amount of excess in the parks maintenance budget this year is $272,000. And that the amount required for the trail is $290,000. And the shortage for maintaining the fields is approximately $250,000. So I have a concern that perhaps Mr. McGifford could answer. Is we spoke last meeting that funds go into a surplus fund and then come out of that, but it's not a shifting of funds. And it seems to me that, I'm not saying that these numbers are necessarily linked at all, but it seems to me that there's a surplus that resulted in work not being done that then almost equals the exact same amount that we're now spending from the surplus on other works. And I'm wondering if there is any way to track those surpluses more accurately so that we know whether or not one program is shortchanging another.
Okay, I'll just go to our CAO.
Yeah, thank you for the question. Through the chair, I think it comes down to the general activity in the parks. Anything can be tracked better, depending on the detail and the time that we want to code things down to. We could break it down probably a little further than it does in the financial plan at this time, but again, it depends on how much effort we want to put into bringing that forward. The direct correlation wouldn't be there. One's a capital project and one is an operating project, so it is different. There is a surplus in the operating fund that then council may direct towards a project. It was staff's recommendation in the one to take it from the operating surplus and put it towards the trail. If council decided not to use that operating, you could direct it to any other operating project. Hopefully in years to come that we don't have that much of a surplus. In some times we hope we do, so we can build reserves and et cetera. But I believe there is more work. Your intention and questions is duly noted on what you're looking for and how those budgets are linked. So I will have a conversation with finance and see what type of a breakdown of the parks budget and related items we can bring forward for you.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, and through you to the CEO. Thank you for the response, and I will be interested to read that. I'll look forward to it. Thank you.
Thank you. I just wanted to add for context to that over the last few years, our Director of Finance has been making an effort to budget based on actuals and an average of actuals. So, we heard it through a bit of the financial plan presentation this year, but certainly more over the past 2 years. Where budgets have drastically shifted, either down or up as a result of our Director of Finance looking at what we're actually spending and trying to make sure that we're budgeting appropriately, because realistically, we shouldn't have, in years I've been on council, we've had $1.5 million surplus one year. So we shouldn't have surpluses that large in operating. So there's been a real effort to make sure that we are budgeting appropriately and based on a running average of what is actually being used. So thanks for the question. Councillor Solda.
Actual, Madam Mayor, I'll wait till we go to the budget itself. My questions are more related there. Thank you.
Any other questions from council? Okay, seeing none. That report is just for information, so we'll move on to staff reports. Item number 1 is accounts. Councillor Solda.
Madam Mayor, I move that the certification of the Director of Finance dated April 24th, 2023 be received and checks numbered 152533 to 152650 and inclusive in payment of accounts totaling $1,956,891.56 be approved.
Thank you. Moved by Councillor Solda, seconded by Councillor Mealy. Seeing no comments on the motion, all in favor?
Yes.
Carried. Thank you. Moving on to bylaws. Item number 1, we have the 2023 to 2027 financial plan, bylaw number 5075-2023. And I'll go to our Director of Finance.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. So as we approach the deadline to complete the financial plan within the statutory requirements of before May 15th. We are seeking adoption of the financial plan. So we've been through the last couple of months reviewing the financial details, taking recommendations, making recommendations to council on the financial plan. With that, currently we have a financial plan that reflects an increase to property taxes for the single-family residential household of 7.26%. And this financial plan will be reflected in the following report as far as tax bylaws. So, you know, we're at the end now of the financial planning process. So we're making the recommendation for adoption today. With that, if there is any desire for council to make changes, we'd have to have a special meeting in order to fit this in to meet the deadlines. So with that, we're seeking adoption today for the financial plan.
Thank you very much. Councillor Solda.
So just a quick couple of questions to go back to the last meeting we had regarding contingency funds. We had a surplus, and we've spent some of the surplus that was for other projects. So do we have any left at this moment? I believe there was like 100,000 or 200,000 left or something like that.
Madam Mayor, through to Councillor Solda, with the reserve or the surplus that we have, we're seeking to put that aside to the reserve, and then if council would like to allocate any reserve funds, it has a non-tax impact in this current year. So it doesn't need to be made today, but we could allocate additional funding to contingency and increase that from our surplus reserve from prior years. So that is an option moving forward. We anticipated the surplus being at about $700,000 at the last meeting. That would leave, as Councillor Solda mentioned, approximately $100,000, but we'll present the financial statements, the audited financial statements at our next council meeting in order to meet another statutory deadline to have those financial statements approved by council before May 15th. So.
Councillor Solda.
All right, I like that because you know I like it because I'm looking at going back to the Parks and Rec and bumping up their reserves as well as the RCMP. So, Madam Mayor, would that be a notice of motion or do I wait until the next meeting? What is your pleasure on that?
It's your choice. We certainly could, if it's coming to next council meeting anyways, a motion would be appropriate at that time. If you'd like to make a notice of motion today under new business, you're certainly welcome to.
All right, Madam Mayor, I will be doing that on the agenda if you don't mind putting that on. And so I'm happy with that. But I do have a question on this page 36. It says line 29911. It says contingency funds. Is that, it says other budget consideration. Is that the one that you're referring to we were just talking about?
Madam Mayor, so that normally has the $200,000 in contingency. With that, absolutely, if council chooses to add additional funds to contingency, they could do that. Alternatively, if we foresee any need to put funds aside directly from the surplus from prior years, we could do that also. So council has the choice to do either.
All right, I'm just going to stay my course. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Were there other questions from council? Councillor Douglas. Absolutely.
So I'd like to make a motion that the City of Port Alberni 2023 to 2027 Financial Plan Bylaw number 5075, 2023 be now finally adopted, signed by the Mayor and Corporate Officer and numbered 5075.
Thank you. Seconded by Councillor Mealy. Are there other questions? So I would just like to ask a question process-wise, because we did give early approval to the 10th and Dunbar project at our last meeting. I don't see any need for any financial plan amendment. The money is set aside for that project. However, what I would like is for council to have a report on the scope of that project, what it currently looks like, and if what the other options were and what the future needs may be, so that council can make sure we have a full understanding of if that is the right way to proceed. So given that we have already allocated the funds in the budget, given early approval if that tender needs to complete, are we in line to pass the budget today and still receive that report if council approves requesting it prior to the project moving forward?
Thank you very much for the question. I believe that in the report, we will bring it forward, but you'll see that the changes for safety of pedestrian and bike, this is the first step in doing it. It doesn't stop us from doing the secondary changes once we look at the overall impacts at different intersections. And as soon as we have the final report on that, we can bring that forward with the costs on the different projects to enhance the safety at that intersection. So I don't see any reason why we wouldn't pass the budget today, but there would be a further report. What we would like to do is continue to make those safety improvements at the intersection that are planned for, so we get them complete this summer.
So I think my question is, we passed a motion to give early approval. The tender has been put out but not awarded. Prior to that tender being awarded, I would like to see the scope of work that's being completed, because there was certainly a misunderstanding, in my opinion, on the scope of the project and how it shifted over time. So and understanding that we may do another phase to this project, but I'd like to see before we put the tender out, maybe there's a bigger project that needs to be done this year. And council hasn't seen this project, so we gave early approval to it just based on a verbal report. This council hasn't seen that project, and it certainly has shifted from my memory of the project and how it was originally intended to be looked at. So prior to the tender being awarded, can a report come to council?
Sure, I would like the direction to bring a report, because that'd be short order, so we would make sure that we get on that right away. So if council would like a report before we award the project, but I, again, don't think that would actually need to stop the carrying of this motion for the current budget.
Great, and I agree. So I'm completely comfortable with passing the budget today, knowing that those funds are allocated, and at the very least, if it shifts, it may become a larger project that we could make a financial plan amendment for down the road. So I will plan, just for council's awareness, to make a motion under new business today to request that report. And if everyone's comfortable, we can proceed with the budget as is today. Councillor Patola.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Since this motion is so central to the business of the city, I am concerned that it be passed in a proper, appropriate, and binding manner. So on essentially a point of order, at the last meeting, when we were discussing 3 additions to that financial plan, I made a point of order with regards to dividing the motion into 3. And that point of order was not ruled on, Madam Mayor, but Madam Mayor, the chair at the time, did recommend a motion to sever. The motion failed, and what continued. Unfortunately, because the point of order wasn't ruled on, it undermines the subsequent motions and vote. And if it was just a question of the majority being against my point of order, that would be the way that the cookie crumbles. But this cookie is not crumbling that way, because I referred to the council bylaw procedure. And in the council bylaw procedure, it distinctly says, when the question under consideration contains distinct propositions, upon request of any member, the vote upon each proposition shall be taken separately. So as a matter of right, the point of order should have been granted, and the 3 motions should have been debated separately. Whether the outcome is going to be different or not is of little importance. What is of importance here is that because they were not passed in the appropriate constitutional manner, I would suggest that the matter be revisited and each of those three motions be voted on separately before we come to the final approval of the financial plan.
Thank you. So, and I can't remember if there was a motion on the floor at that time that was already seconded. If that was the case, then an amendment to change the motion on the floor would have been required. I believe that's what was done, and that motion failed. The point of order does not give the right for that motion to be changed. An amendment gives the right for the motion to be changed, unless there was not a motion on the floor at the time, but I don't believe that was the case. We may need to refer back to our minutes on that. Appreciate that you recognize most likely it would not change the outcome. However, we want to make sure we are moving forward correctly and appropriately. Do you know offhand if there was a motion on the floor already?
Madam Mayor, my recollection would be there was a motion on the floor, which is specifically why Section 18, subsection 1, subsection G applies, because it only applies when there is a question under consideration, which is a motion on the floor.
I'm not sure if our corporate officer is able to help with this or not. My understanding of process is that if you are going to change a motion that is moved and seconded, that it requires an amendment, and that a point of order does not change that. It simply brings up the topic of conversation and then allows you to put a amendment on the floor to the motion that's moved and seconded.
That's my understanding as well, Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I respectfully disagree, because this is not a question of motions and sub-motions or amendments. This is a question of a point of order, and the section specifically states that when the question, which is a motion on the floor under consideration, contains distinct propositions, which this one did. There were three distinct different motions being done, and they had to do with different funding sources from the city. Upon request of any member, being any single individual, the vote upon each proposition shall, which is compulsory and directive, be taken separately. Those are the bylaws we're operating under.
So firstly, I would just suggest that in the future, if you do have a concern procedurally about something like this, I would suggest that we bring it forward prior to a council meeting, because the best course of action right now would be for our staff to be able to provide a proper opinion on best way to move forward. You know, do we rescind that motion? Do we not? Was it okay? Like, we really need staff to be able to look at that properly, to make sure, as you say, that we are moving forward correctly. I guess my question, we could certainly recess and come back with more information, if council's okay with that. My question would be, if we did rescind, are we able to pass both of these motions today for completing the budget, or do we need a special meeting? So we have a couple options. I would say we can recess. We could also pass a motion to alter our agenda today, so that we could come back to this toward the end of the meeting, and staff could go and see if they could get clarity on best way to move forward. Or we can proceed and correct later if we need to. Mike, do you have a suggestion?
Through the chair, this is an interesting one. I'd have to get caught up on what our bylaw currently says, but I would say recess is the best course of action, so then we're dealing with it all at this time. And I would have to also look at to see if we could make all the motions today, where if we change one, I do believe we would probably need a second meeting. But I would suggest taking a recess.
Okay, so we do have a motion on the floor, and that was moved and seconded. We could certainly recess for 15 minutes, see if we can get clarity from there, and then come back if everyone is okay with that. Councillor Solda.
Madam Mayor, I'm going to postpone the motion until we come back. I'll move that.
Is there a seconder for that? Seconded by Councillor Vitola, and then would somebody like to move on the motion, all in favor? To postpone the motion until we come back from recess.
Yes.
Yeah, I think we have to withdraw it and then come back and put it back on the floor.
Okay, so Madam Mayor, I'll withdraw the motion. I'll move to withdraw the motion, take off the other. Thank you.
Uncharted territory. I made the motion. I believe I made the motion.
You did, yes.
Yeah, so it was seconded.
Yes, correct.
Okay. I'd like to proceed with the motion.
Okay. I'm going to go to our CAO.
Through the chair, I believe we can recess and then come back and deal with the motion that's on the floor. I don't believe we need to postpone at this time, as long as we have a definite time. We aren't postponing to another day. I believe if we're just postponing for 10 or 15 minutes, that we can postpone that and then come back and deal with what's on the floor.
Okay, so we have a motion on the floor, not voted on to postpone. We are going to have a motion to recess. Councillor Solda, are you making that motion?
Yes.
Motion to recess from Councillor Solda, seconded by Councillor Patola. Any comments? Seeing none on the motion, all in favor?
Yes.
Opposed? Carried, thank you. Seconded by Councillor Mealy. All in favor?
Yes.
Carried. Thank you. Okay, I'm going to go to our CAO for an update on the best way to proceed.
Thank you, and through the chair, I believe the right course of action would be to defeat the current motion on the floor and then move forward with rescinding the meeting, the motions made at last meeting and voting on each item separately for this one. In the case of that, we will schedule a new council meeting. We're in the process of it to schedule a new council meeting for tomorrow at 5:30 to deal with the budget.
Thank you. So the first thing that we need to do is to defeat the motion that is on the floor because it is moved and seconded. So that is the final adoption of the budget. So that City of Port Alberni 2023 to 2027 Financial Plan Bylaw 5075 2023 be now finally adopted, signed by the Mayor and Corporate Officer and numbered 5075. So we will vote on that motion with the intent being to defeat it. Are there any questions, comments on process or clarification on that?
I'll second that motion you made, Madam Mayor.
There's no motion needed. No motion needed because that motion is moved and seconded. So the intent here is that we're going to go back and rescind third reading. And so we can't pass the motion to adopt the budget. So we would just defeat the motion is the simplest way. Okay? So on the motion, all in favor? Opposed?
I'm opposed.
And I'm just waiting. Thank you, Councillor Haggard. Okay, and that motion is defeated. And then, Council, we're going to go through, so we have third reading, which was amended and passed. So would somebody like to make a motion to rescind third reading as amended?
So moved, Madam Mayor.
Moved by Councillor Mealy, seconded by Councillor Dame. Any comments on that motion to rescind? Seeing none, on the motion, all in favor?
Yes.
Carried, thank you. And now we can reread third reading. So we have the motions in front of us. It is two separate motions here. And if we would like to do them separately, we can do that. Councillor Patola, would you like to read?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I move that council amend the City of Port Alberni 2023-2027 Financial Plan Bylaw number 5075-2023 as follows for the capital plan in progress by linking the Roger Creek Trails funding being moved from Growing Communities Fund to the General Fund, brackets prior year surplus, in the amount of $290,000.
Thank you. Is there a seconder?
Second, Mayor.
Seconded by Councillor Mealy. Any comments on this portion? Councillor Patola.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. This was the portion that I had previously commented on, and noting that it seems to be, although not directly funding, benefiting from the lack of $250,000 of work going into the ball fields that's now being available to go into the trails. And on that basis, I would be opposed to it. I think that this project, although I like trails, should be funded appropriately from taxes if we all agree that that's a project that we want. And we certainly already agreed that the ball fields are a project that we want because we've put $250,000 into them, which seems to be pretty much the amount of surplus coming out of the Parks Maintenance Fund. So I don't necessarily say ball fields are more important than trails, but in an era of restraint and keeping our tax increase down to 7%, I think we need to prioritize plans, and it seems that council, in many meetings ago, has already prioritized the ball fields. So I think we should just stick with that.
Thank you. Councillor Mealy.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'll say it, I prioritize ball fields over trails. That's okay to say. I'm fine with that. And in fact, I'm interested in this because I'd like a second kick at the can at this discussion. The reason why I wasn't in favor of it at first was just because it's coming out, our fund was supposed to be coming out of another grant, and I've got my notes right here, but now we can't do that. You can't stack it. The other question I had during that conversation was the funding that we're getting for this, when does it have to be used by? And I believe the answer, and I won't speak, but I believe the answer was by March of next year, the fiscal year for the province. So in saying that, if we want to defeat this and go forward, I guess we're going to lose out on $400,000 from the province. Am I correct in that assessment?
CAO.
Thank you for the question, and through the chair, I believe you are correct. I don't have the exact numbers in front of me, but the intent of what you're saying is correct. We would lose out on the provincial funding.
Councillor Mealy.
So thank you, Madam Mayor, I appreciate it. So yes, again, in saying how disappointed, I guess, disappointed isn't the word, we'll use disappointed though, that funding couldn't be stacked. I guess the question is, do we want to go forward with this trail project at all this year? And because if we don't want to go through it this year, chances are finding grant money for it afterwards may be tough to get. And I guess that's where the question lies.
Thank you so much. I think that's a good summary of it. A couple things that I would add is that it is rare to get 100% grant funding. So the amount of grant funding that we've received, I would expect would be the most grant money we can expect to receive. Another point I think is relevant is that this project actually was in our original draft of the budget for this year, and it also was passed in the budget for last year for this year. So the $290,000 actually was budgeted for this year, but because we had not heard on the grant until quite late in our budget process, it was removed because we weren't going to budget for it and tax for it if we didn't have the grant funds, and therefore would not be able to complete the project. So this project was planned, budgeted last year, and we just pushed it out because we hadn't heard on the grant. So I do think that's relevant because it's not something that's come up last minute as a request for funding. It is just the province took a while to decide on the grant. The other thing I think is really important to note is that we have allocated $250,000 in funding for ball fields this year. So it is not ball fields or trail. We are doing ball fields. We have $250,000 of capital work in our budget for this year for ball fields. So granted, I do think that some people would like us to spend more on ball fields, and I know that that's been a topic of conversation, and we are waiting on a report for further improvements that could be made, but we are not funding ball fields so that we can fund this, and I think that's a very important distinction. We have made a commitment to funding ball fields as well. I'm going to go to Councillor Dame, and then Councillor Solda and Councillor Mealy.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Yeah, just to echo what you just said, that was largely what I wanted to say was that I think it's important that we don't make this an either-or situation, and that the community understands that we value both the ball fields and trails. And I believe that our intention is to see, funding go to both of those things. For me, my concern, if we want to talk priorities, which I'm hesitant to use the term priority here because I think both of them are priorities, and I don't think it's beneficial to pit one against the other. But I do think that there is an opportunity cost in turning down the opportunity for this trail upgrade, and as Councillor Mealy pointed out, we may not have this opportunity again, and it's something that we've already put enough time and resources towards that if we just let it go now, then there's a lot of wasted resources that have already gone into this that will be a loss that we have to keep in mind. Thank you.
Thank you. Because I see that we have our Manager of Economic Development here, and he is the person who submitted the grant application, I'm wondering if he could come forward and just speak to the history of this project and prior grant applications that have been made, as well as possibly the likelihood of, in the future, getting a larger grant award for this project or getting a different grant award for this project if we turn this project down.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. So we began attempting to link the trails and in fact expand the trail network up Roger Creek Ravine, across the Log Train Trail and down Dry Creek about 10 years ago. This was our fourth grant application in that period of time. It was for 60% of the project budget, which is on the low side. I mean, sometimes they're matching grants, sometimes they're 80%. So we were a bit disappointed that it was that way. 435,000, as I mentioned. And it's more than a trail. We're also protecting fish habitat, 4 species of salmon, 2 of trout in Roger Creek, because there is a slope immediately to the east of the train tracks and trestle that is sloughing. It's failing as we go, so it is an effort to also protect that. I really don't know. I mean, there are active transportation grants that come up regularly, and I don't know how an application would be received from us if we turn down the money. I mean, we can justify it. We can say we were really concerned about the tax increase, but I think it would make things a little bit tougher. And when we're, I've just come back from a conference, economic development conference, not a tourism conference, but the number of communities that are investing in their trail projects is almost universal. So I think it behooves us to continue to make those investments. And I recognize the position that council finds themselves in as the primary one who's making the grant applications. I can tell you that it would be a challenge, and we'll rise to the challenge again if we have to.
Thank you so much. And I'm just wondering, before we proceed to our next speakers, if our Director of Finance, just because our Manager of Economic Development did mention possibly turning it down because we are concerned about the tax impact, could you let us know how the tax impact would shift if we pulled this project?
Well, Madam Mayor, with the tax increase, it would be over 1% increase for a tax impact on the average single-family resident.
But is this project being funded from general revenue?
At this time, no, it's coming from the prior year surplus.
So would there be a tax impact if we pulled this project?
There'd be no tax impact.
Thank you. So I have Councillor Solda and then Councillor Mealy.
So just to, Madam Mayor, so just to get it clear, so Councillor Patola was talking about taxing the community. So that would be a 1% impact? Is that, am I hearing that right?
There's no tax impact for this project in our budget currently, as it is suggested.
Okay, so fair enough. So as much as I love the trails and stuff like that, and the ball fields, I mean, there's so much that we have to do in this community. This is not the only thing in this community that needs some love and some work, and we have other trails and stuff. Where I'm going with this is that we also have $5 million that was given to us. So there's no stopping in that part of it regarding the ball fields. We're still waiting for a report, and that's why I've been really silent on the ball fields right now, because I want to see the report and I want us to do the right job. But we still have $5 million. It's not like we're going to spend $5 million on ball fields, but we're working on that, and we're still waiting a report on that too. So do we park that, the ball fields, and carry on? And that's the question. The rest of us have to soul search on that one. So I just wanted to bring that up, but we still have money.
Thank you. And just to confirm again, we do have, I believe the amount is $250,000 that's currently in our budget for ball fields this year, with a commitment to add more for next year. Councillor Mealy and then Councillor Patola.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. So just to clarify and the $250,000 is to upgrade baseball fields in town. Only one of which is Rec Park will be used by softball afterwards. What the people that have been coming to every meeting is minor softball, and they're talking about a whole different set of fields altogether. So it's kind of apples and oranges, even though we're talking about all fields in general. This chunk of trail it's actually a highly used area, and you see it every day, especially if you're driving by when the kids are out of school. I think if you've lived in Port Alberni all your life, you've walked the trestle, you've walked down there before, you've cut across that way. So it's actually one of those places where a trail improvement would be good, and especially now, of course, thank you to Mr. Deacon for bringing up the salmon habitat as well and what needs to be done there. So I think that's my levels of emotion during last meeting was like this. It's like, oh, it's going to get paid for by funding, and then no, it's not. But if you don't, okay, so but you have to do it because because of the impacts. But then you have to have the taxpayer pay for it. So I would look forward into going forward with this project. At this time, and using the $5 million elsewhere, merely because we do have 400,000 plus coming from the government. But again, I am disappointed that it was not out of another, and I mean, it's just knowledge of, I didn't know you couldn't stack it, and I'm gathering staff didn't either because they brought it back last meeting. So, but I do appreciate Councilor Patola doing this so we can bring it back. So thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Patola.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Through you to Director McGifford. I'm taking note of Councillor Dame's comment about being fiscally responsible, which is really the whole point of this conversation, is priorities and fiscal responsibility. And I wonder, Madam Mayor, if Director McGifford could tell us, hypothetically, I think is the way we need to word this, is what is the value of the $400,000+ grant in the terms of percentage tax raise? So I say hypothetically, if I can explain the question. You might not have those numbers readily available. I'm looking for round numbers so we can be fiscally responsible. But hypothetically, if we didn't take the $400,000, somewhere along the lines in the future, we will be doing this project and we will be spending that $400,000. And then if we didn't take the money now, that could represent a hypothetical tax increase in the hypothetical future year that we hypothetically do the project. And if Mr. McGifford could tell us that, then we would know and be able to tell the community that this is not a tax increase, but we can actually quantify a tax savings by using the grant.
Director of Finance.
Madam Mayor, it's approximately 1.5% of a tax percent.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Any other comments? Okay, we have a motion moved and seconded, so that is for A1. Everybody has it written in front of them. Seeing no further comments on the motion, all in favor?
I support
And
the
opposed?
motion.
Thank you, opposed? Carried, thank you. Okay, and Councillor Patola, would you like to read the second part?
That council amend the City of Port Alberni 2023-2027 Financial Plan Bylaw number 5075-2023 as follows for the capital plan in progress. Add $35,000 coming from taxation to the capital plan for 2023 for the purposes of implementing the structural recommendations of the City Hall Violence Risk Assessment.
Thank you. Moved by Councillor Patola, seconded by Councillor Solda. Any comments on this portion? Seeing none, on the motion, all in favor?
Yes.
Carried, thank you. And if you want to continue with the third?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. That council amend the City of Port Alberni 2023-2027 Financial Plan Bylaw number 5075-2023 as follows for the capital plan in progress. Add $20,000 to the project 21012, replace 2005 Ford F-350 with comp body number 520 from the Equipment Replacement Reserve Fund.
Thank you. Moved by Councillor Patola, seconded by Councillor Solda. Any comments on this? Seeing none, on the motion, all in favor?
Yes.
Carried, thank you. And Councillor Patola, would you like to continue with B?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. And Madam Mayor, I'm going to read B in its entirety, as that my understanding of the point of order was just with regards to 1A.
Unless somebody would like to call a point of order to separate it.
That council provide early approval and authorize staff to proceed with the following as allocated in the City of Port Alberni 2023-2027 Financial Plan Bylaw Number 5075, 2023. I, 2023 Capital Plan, 10th Avenue and Dunbar Street, 10th Avenue and Redford Street traffic improvements in the amounts of $410,000. II, 2023 Capital Plan, Phase 6, Couch and Water Main Upgrades, 2.1 million, tender closed and awarded within 60 days. III, 2023 Capital Plan, Solid Waste Truck Replacement, number 401, $443,060. And IV, 2021 Capital Plan, Project 21012, replace 2005 Ford F-350 with comp body, number 520, $140,532.
Thank you. Seconded by Councillor Solda. Any comments on this portion? Councillor Mealy.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Would you like to put in to receive a report on the Dunbar and 10th at this point and just get it out of the way?
Not as a part of the budget motion. We do have to keep it the same because we are going to proceed tomorrow, but thank you very much for that. I will add it in later. Or add it not to this process later. Thank you. Moved and seconded. On the motion, all in favor?
Yes.
Carried. Thank you. And lastly,
And Madam Mayor, I'm pleased to move that the City of Port Alberni 2023-2027 Financial Plan Bylaw Number 5075, 2023 be read a third time as amended.
thank you. Moved by Councillor Patola, seconded by Councillor Mealy. On the motion, all in favor?
Yes.
Carried. Thank you. Okay, so we have rescinded and then repassed third reading. The next item on our agenda is our tax rates bylaw, and I'd like to request a motion to defer that topic to our special meeting tomorrow at 5:30. Moved by Councillor Solda, seconded by Councillor Mealy. Any comments? Seeing none on the motion, all in favor? Carried.
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you. And item number 3, we have Officers and Indemnification Bylaw Number 5061, 2023, and this is final reading and adoption. Councillor Solda, would you like to read this?
Madam Mayor, I move that the City of Port Alberni Officers and Indemnification Bylaw Number 5061 2023 be now finally adopted, signed by the Mayor and Corporate Officer, and numbered 5061.
Thank you. Moved by Councillor Solda, seconded by Councillor Patola. Seeing no comments on the motion, all in favor?
Yes.
Carried. Thank you. Item number 4, we have Development Procedures Bylaw Number 5076, 2023. Director of Development Services.
Thank you, Madam Mayor and Council. Before you is our Development Procedures Bylaw for considerations of readings. This bylaw outlines application requirements, process, potential delegation of authority, security, and third-party review fees. The Committee of the Whole did review this draft bylaw at its January 31st meeting and did have a number of questions that we've attempted to answer in the staff report. And I will just kind of go over some highlights of what this bylaw would entail. Currently, there are a number of minor variances that Council considers that we consider are minor in nature, that really do not impact greatly on any subject neighboring properties. Currently, so staff have reviewed what other municipalities have been looking at in this regard, and they seem to be anywhere from 10 to 15% is what other municipalities are considering a minor variance. And that is the council itself, under the provincial legislation, is the one that must make a determination on what is considered a minor variance, and that's what this bylaw is looking for. So under this bylaw, we are proposing that a minor variance be considered 25%. So anything 25% and under would be considered a minor variance, and that this would apply to setbacks, parking, height, projections, access, and lot coverage. And under this bylaw, council is being asked to consider delegating that authority to potentially issue minor variances to staff. This would allow staff to consider these applications in a timely manner, reducing the processing time. Without this delegation, it would typically add a month to a process for a minor variance, which are typically guided by our OCP and zoning bylaw. And this delegation would allow staff to improve timelines for both applicants and the staff, creating better customer service. The committee had asked for some potential examples, and so there's, in the staff report, there's a list of minor variances that council has considered and approved that would be within this 25% threshold, just for council's information. Also within this development procedures bylaw is the process to potentially delegate the authority to staff to issue development permits. And these are form and character development permits for both multifamily or commercial, which is currently in our official community plan. And those guidelines are set by council in the official community plan bylaw. And essentially the way the process works, if an applicant makes a submission for this, staff will review it to ensure that it complies with those guidelines. If it doesn't, we work with that applicant to ensure that it does. And only then does it come to council for their consideration. By delegating this authority to staff, again, it would reduce the processing timelines for both the applicant and staff. I do want to make one note that this is not something that is discretionary. If the application meets those guidelines, it must be granted approval. And staff would, I would propose, if this bylaw is approved and that delegated authority moves forward, staff would report out to council on development permits and minor variances in our quarterly reports to keep council informed on just how many they are, what they generally involved. This bylaw also clarifies the land development application process for both public and staff. This bylaw lays out several flow charts about how applications would proceed. And so this would help inform our application forms and also our development services website. Under this proposed bylaw, in accordance with the Local Government Act, applicants would have the ability to request council to reconsider a decision of any authority that was delegated to staff. The Committee of the Whole had asked a question about whether there was the ability for public to appeal a delegated authority. We did have some consultation with legal counsel, and that is not recommended. The Local Government Act expressly entitles the owner, or i.e. of the land, for a right to reconsideration. There's no similar reference for right of consideration by anyone else under the Local Government Act. And the Local Government Act does not provide an opportunity for the public to comment on development permit. The delegation of minor variances is very key. It's minor, so it's within that 25% threshold. So these are intended to be relatively uncontroversial. If staff have an indication that even a minor variance might have some controversy, I think it would still likely be staff would then take the option to have that go through a council process. So with that being said, the development procedures bylaw is on for 3 readings for council's consideration, as this would help us improve the processing and timeline, and is in alignment with the provincial legislation that is really asking local governments to look at these items, and I'd be pleased to answer any questions of council.
Thank you very much for that report. Are there questions from council? Councillor Patola.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, and through the chair to the director. Thank you very much for your work and your staff's work in developing this. This is quite an extensive bylaw, and I very much appreciated reading it in its entirety. There are a few items in it that I would chosen different writing for, and I will just enumerate those for council's and staff's consideration. So the first is 25% variance, especially because other communities think minor is 10 to 15%. I think 25% is simply too high, especially when the example, well, particularly with regards to items D and G in the definition of minor development variance permits. D says a 25% variance for building setbacks, lot coverage, lot frontage, and usable open space and permeable surfaces. I think a 25% variance for lot coverage can be quite significant. Not always is, but can be. Further, a 25% variance for building height is something that I think can also be quite significant. It was an example or a question that was brought up at the Committee of the Whole, and I note the report gives an example of a 25% variance in building height is only going to 5 stories from 4 stories, which I think is quite significant and could be quite significant for neighbors or other residents of that particular area of the community. So quite possibly 25% for number of parking spaces might not be that great, but I really do think adding another story or increasing the lot coverage, which invariably would lead to greater density in the area simply through a delegated process, is not appropriate. I would like to see, as an aside, this bylaw incorporate the motion that my friend Councillor Douglas has on the floor and associated possibilities for CACs and density bonusing, which should go in with any variance permit. With regards to 2.1 sub H, there's an ability to waive the requirement for public hearing. I understand that we often do that when things are in accord with the OCP, but that's a decision of council. And I don't think that waiving hearings and waiving the rights of citizens is something that should be delegated, as well as the requirement of a site plan can be waived and under 2.2C, and that I have some problems with. So the general concept of delegation and speeding up the process is one I'm completely in favor of. It's just how far is too far, what's the appropriate distance to go? And so that's the point of my comments. I do believe that there should be a requirement that where there is controversy, that the matter should be returned to council. And I understand the wording of the act may not provide an appeal mechanism like it does for the applicant, but as the director pointed out, if staff has any indication that there's any controversy, then the matter would go before council. And I think we should just codify that in the bylaw so that if there is controversy that arises, it automatically goes to council and isn't left to staff to bear the burden of making a political decision by delegation. I do appreciate the comment, and I didn't see it in the report, but the director stated that staff would report quarterly. I think that it would be important that if staff reports quarterly, or even biannually, that report shouldn't just be numbers, but should be actual itemized circumstances so that individuals know what is going on in the community. Not that, oh, there've been 3 roofs extended, but the roof was extended at this address, and this address, or whatever the particular variance is, so that we are in touch with what is going on in our community and can be sure that when there's delegation, there still has to be oversight of that delegation. So very much in favor of delegation. I'd say a little bit less than we have here and continued oversight by council. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm just going to give our Director of Development Services and Acting CAO an opportunity to respond to some of those things. I heard inclusion of community amenity contributions, concern around the 25%, and waiving of public hearings specifically. Additionally, there was the note about controversy, and I'm not sure how we would kind of itemize that in a bylaw because whether or not there's controversy is largely due to opinion, but maybe Scott would be able to comment on that as well.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. To Councilor Patul, one clarification, in staff's research, the variances that other municipalities were considering were between 10 and 50%, not 15%. So
my mistake.
That was part of the reasoning why staff, for lack of a better word, kind of went halfway in between, and that's kind of where the 25% came from in that regard when we were researching as what other best practices, what other communities are doing. In regards to the community amenity agreement, I know that's a motion coming up later in the process or in the council meeting. That's not typically under a development procedures bylaw. It's a separate thing, and this city has never done any research on that. There's legal and development implications on that, and if council wishes to do that, I would hesitate just to add it at this late period of time without some proper research and reporting out to council on the implications of that. So that would be my first inclination on that, is that should be held separately for council to provide separate direction for research on that particular topic, because it has much wider implications. It's more often not dealt with during a variance. It's much more so during OCP and zoning amendments where a substantial increase in density is being considered. So there's a lot to that kind of thing. So.
Thank you. Are you able to speak to just the comment around process for if there is a controversial application? And just, I guess, from your perspective, is there an additional option rather than just staff bringing it forward if they sense controversy?
And that would be challenging to write into a bylaw, I suspect. It would have to be somewhat left to staff's judgment to the best of our ability. But that is also why it's important for council to be comfortable with what we are saying is a minor variance. This bylaw is still in council's consideration. If council wishes to direct some changes to it, this is a time for council to consider that. So, the intention is that these would want to be mostly minor, so that they aren't terribly controversial, but to allow them to be processed in a more timely fashion when most of them are typically moved forward. So, but this is council's bylaw. So if there are changes that council would wish staff to consider, we would certainly take that direction.
Thank you. Just Councillor Douglas, and then I'll go to Councillor Patola.
Thank you. I'd like to make the motion, if I may, and if I can get a seconder, carry on with some more discussion. That the City of Port Alberni Development Procedures Bylaw number 5076, 2023 be now introduced and read a first time.
Thank you. Moved by Councillor Douglas, seconded by Councillor Mealy.
And if I can speak to it briefly, most of us are aware that there's a housing crisis. If there's nobody here that doesn't realize that, put your hand up. And we have big city lots in this community, and we've got a lot of space, got a lot of people that want to build, and we have a lot of people that are having a hard time dealing with the bureaucracy and the building permit process and time. And this helps with time. And I'm completely in favor of this package that's been put forward. There's not one element in this that I am not in favor of. I think it's a very good thing for us to move forward on to help allow our professional staff that we hire to do a professional job and to make a few of the decisions that they're very capable of doing without having to come back and throw it onto our council agenda so that we can delay a process of building housing for people for another 2 to 4 to 6 to 8 weeks or even longer. So very much in favor of it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Douglas. Councillor Patola.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Through you, Madam Mayor, to the chair. With regards to defining what a controversy is, I have a different point of view and think it'd be quite easy. Something as nebulous as minor is defined in this bylaw. Something called a controversy could equally be defined by numbers. And certainly we could define it as one letter of opposition that's received by the planning department. We could define it as 2 letters of opposition or 10 letters. So there's a still a requirement, as I read it, I may be mistaken, for some public input, for some notice to be put out that there will be a variance. I could be wrong about that. The director is shaking his head. But in any event, even if there isn't notice, when an application is made, if during that process, even unsolicited letters of contest are received by the city, we should define that as a controversy. And so we can establish some level. Perhaps it's not just one person, maybe more, but that's certainly something that can be defined quite easily. I don't think that bringing matters before council so they can be debated in public is the objective that Councillor Douglas states of standing in the way and delaying development. I think that is part of the democratic process. And while it is important to speed up the building process, to facilitate not only homes for individuals to live in, but for the entire economic benefit of the city, that is important. But there is a line, and that is the whole purpose of the director bringing this forward to council to make council's bylaw. There is a line that we have to be careful about crossing when we deprive citizens of their democratic ability to have input. So when we delegate away our authority, we also delegate away any ability for the population of the community to have input, whether it be directly by them standing at the podium or whether it be through their elective representatives that are accountable every 4 years for their actions. So I'm not against delegation. I'm not against anything. I'm just wanting to find the right line in the sand, and I don't think it's absolute one way or the other. And I would really encourage the rest of council to consider where they think that line is appropriate. We've had a lot of discussion on this council about being engaged with the citizens of Port Alberni. And as we change our other procedures for engagement, I think we should realize that variances and zonings are another area that engagement is healthy. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Mealy.
All right, thank you, Madam Mayor. Through you to my fellow councillor. So I think what we're looking for is a mechanism for the public, and I agree. However, in saying that, I trust Mr. Smith. I've known him for a long time, and I trust his ability to look at something and go, we need to have a more broader discussion with council. So I understand that. So I'm not saying that this has to happen or anything like that, but maybe a compromise would be within this bylaw is if something minor within that 25% variance comes up, it is posted on the city website for 5 days in which the public can petition the mayor and the mayor's office to bring it to council. And if there's no petition, then we go forward. Perhaps that could be a simple solution, if that's even possible.
Thank you. I'm going to go to our CAO and then probably to our Director of Development Services and Acting CAO just to speak to process for notice and when public notice does come out and signage and everything else.
I just wanted to clarify, this is council's policy. There isn't a trust thing with administration. We trust council and we give you the right information to make a decision. So I would hate for anybody to feel that there is any trust issues on that. And as far as defining anything, we can put anything in this. And I am sure I've made lots of bylaw changes in my career. And when we make a wrong one, you hear it. The public is not silent when something is made and they aren't in favor of. So again, what is the right percentage? I'm sure there's been a range, and as the Director of Development Services has stated, it ranges from 10% to 50%. That's quite a long range, and I'm sure some communities have been through that. So again, I believe staff and administration has picked that number, but again, it's open for debate in council's direction, and that's all I wanted to clarify.
Thank you. Director of Development Services.
I do want to make one clarification for council. The provincial legislation that has enabled this delegated authority does not require public notice for a minor variance. So so under the current scenario, public notice would not be given for that. So if council wanted to do that over and above the provincial legislation, we would need to consider that into a new section of this bylaw. Now, and that would somewhat mitigate the timeliness of being able to process these. But as the CAO has said, this is council's bylaw. So council needs to be comfortable with this, and so we will certainly take direction on what council would like, how council would like to move forward with this.
Thank you very much. Are there additional questions or comments? Councillor Patola.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, and through you to the Director of Development. Thank you for that clarification. I totally did get that wrong about the public notice. And I'm not suggesting that we should create a new manner of public notice. My comments, although I may have given specific examples, are much more general and along the lines of Councillor Mealy's suggestion. Some suggestion that there be some mechanism left open. So as we delegate this authority, we close the door for access to the democratic process, which is fine because it speeds up the non-democratic process, which often people care more about because it's dollars in your pocket. But we should leave a crack open. I don't know what the mechanism is appropriate for that crack. I've suggested one, Councillor Mealy has suggested one, and perhaps before we go on to further motions, I could interject a motion between 4A and 4B now to ask that this matter, that the staff provides some suggestions on how that door could be left open and bring those suggestions back for implementation into the bylaw before it proceeds to second reading.
Okay, thank you for that. So there is a motion on the floor, and so we can't accept a motion yet. It was moved and seconded, A. If you would like to make one after A, you certainly would be welcome to. I have Councillor Solda, and then I don't believe there were any additional comments.
Madam Mayor, I understand where Councillor Patola is going, and I understand a motion I'm happy with. I look at it democratically. We hear from the people. You know, if they're not happy with something, where are they? They're at our door, sending emails or doing something like that. They come to City Hall and they voice their opinion. I mean, can we not open up from there? If somebody came up to the podium and said, hey, I'm not happy with what I'm reading here, or I'm building something, my neighbor's doing this, wouldn't that open up a process from there? People voice their opinions. I've never had a voice say, I'm not saying nothing. They come forward. So anyways, that's how I look at it.
Thank you. Okay, everyone. So first reading of this development procedures bylaw is moved and seconded. Not seeing any additional comments, I will call the question on the motion. All in favor?
Yes.
Carried. Thank you. Councillor Patola.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'd like to make a motion that that council request development staff to bring to council suggestions for public input on the delegation, suggestions for how the public would have input into an opposed development variance permit.
Thank you. Is there a seconder? Okay, seconded. Councillor Douglas.
Well, I was just going to suggest, I thought this would be more appropriately put into a notice of motion format, which would come at the end of our council meeting.
I think it is appropriate, given that it is the topic that we're discussing, and that the next motion coming forward is second reading. So I think it's relevant for today. Now, council can choose to deal with it however they would like to deal with it. If this passes, we would then likely not read second and third today. It would make it somewhat irrelevant. I'm going to go to our CAO.
Thank you. I just wanted to make sure that administration has very clear direction on what is seeking, because if it's about public input on all, the 25%, again, that's a big change in process, and we need to understand what we're going back and researching. Is it a change over and above what the provincial regulations are? And I just want to be really careful on where and how much time we put into this with everything else that's within in the current workload. what I would say, if council's not comfortable with the 25%, then you look at a different percentage and you make your decision from there. But again, if I just want to make sure that administration understands the direction very clearly.
Thank you. I just want to say, I think likely shifting the percentage would not accomplish what is being asked for here. I think what's being asked for is a mechanism for the public to engage. I just want to share that from what I read in the report, and certainly hearing from our Director of Development Services, this is in line with what other communities are doing. It follows best practice. It follows all legislation. So I am comfortable proceeding with second and third reading today as it stands, and that would mean defeating this motion. However, I did appreciate Councillor Patola's comments around specificness of reporting, because I think that as we get comfortable with the delegation bylaw, what we need is to be able to to understand more about those delegations in more detail than we may need long into the future. Because this is council's bylaw, we can amend it anytime we want as well. So we may evaluate, see what type of delegations are made over the first 3 months or 6 months of having this bylaw in place, and come back and reevaluate. Maybe we want to change the percentage, maybe we want to change the process. So I think the specificness around the information we receive is really critical for us to make sure we get comfortable. We could even ask that it be a monthly update in the early stages. But for me personally, I'm comfortable with the bylaw as it's been proposed today. So I'm going to go to Councillor Solda and then Councillor Dame.
The only thing about a delegation coming to council if they are upset with something is that it has to be on the agenda, then it has to go back for a staff report, then it's got to come back to us to make a decision. So we're going, how long is that procedure? I mean, we're trying to shorten a procedure. Will it take longer? So just to be clear, you know, what are we going to get ourselves into? And I just am concerned about that, because it has to be on the agenda and with the new rules.
Thank you. A comment from our CAO, and then we'll go to Councillor Dame and Councillor Patola.
I believe the delegation would just follow the normal process. It wouldn't be changing anything, even with our changes coming to the bylaw. I believe the changes are for council's question period and the public input. The other way is through the local elected official or to administration. They can put something on the agenda.
It will have to go on, for sure, it could go on the agenda, but then it has to go back to staff for a report, and then it has to come back to us to ratify it or whatever we do. So I'm just kind of concerned of the process, how long it will be, and I'm just going to go ahead with this unless everybody else goes. Yeah.
Thank you, Councillor Solda. Councillor Dame.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Yeah, I'm just concerned that this is taken what was proposed for the purposes of streamlining a process and potentially added a lot more time and complication to it. I don't know if I personally see a need to go above and beyond the provincial standard. And perhaps this is a much larger conversation to be had about how the public is able to, democratically engage with our processes. But I'm not sure that this specific bylaw is the vehicle for that debate. So I would support it as is, and perhaps there's other avenues that we could have this conversation another time.
Thank you, Councillor Dame. I have Councillor Patola and then Councillor Mealy.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I maybe should reiterate my initial example, how easy it would be to write into the bylaw that should staff receive a letter, 2 letters, or 10 letters opposed to the development permit application, variance application, that would qualify as a controversy and thereby enact the process which the director has already described, being if there's a controversy, we're going to bring it back before council. So the conclusion that, oh, it has to be on the agenda and it has to be by a delegation, it has to be, all of these things, it could be, and I think, yeah, that would be adding unnecessary time. I think writing the bylaw appropriately in the first place to leave that door open for input through a minor manner, such as a certain number of predetermined individuals expressing their opposition, doesn't add any time to any process and is merely an indicator for staff while they're exercising their delegated authority under this bylaw to make a decision with a little bit of direction as to when it might be an issue that should come before council. So none of these suggestions, and that was, again, just my suggestion, but you don't want to rely on me to determine how to speed up the planning process, and thus the motion to ask staff how it would best fit in with their processes and their day-to-day activities, that they could identify when a controversy occurs, and that definition is in the bylaw, so we all know what a controversy is, and then they can simply refer to that definition and say, yes, there is one, no, there isn't one, and proceed with the speedy development variance permit application that we're trying to put in place. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Patola. I would just note that if there is no public notice for minor variances, then the public is not going to be notified to be able to have the opportunity to write letters. So I don't think it is as simple as that, though I understand your intent. My feeling, again, is that this is following best practice, and I think staff has already put forward in the bylaw what their best recommendation is for moving this forward. So myself, I don't support the motion that has been made, but I believe I have Councillor Solda, Councillor Mealy first, and then Councillor Solda.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Sorry, Councillor Solda. So, and I think that's why I totally understand what Councillor Patola is trying to do here. I agree. I like the bylaw as is. However, I'm always one that wants the public to have their chance, to have the opportunity, but I don't want to delay anything. So that's why, I mean, it came out really quickly, but I actually thought about it a bit. A 5-day on the website, and then petition the mayor's office, not council or not staff, the mayor's office. And if the mayor determines on behalf of council to bring it forward, then we bring it forward. And if not, then we just move forward. And at least we're only delaying it by 5 days, so.
I would love to have that kind of power, but the community charter does not give the mayor's office the ability to make decisions on behalf of council in that capacity. So it would have to be more complex than that. Councillor Solda.
Madam Mayor, we have a meeting tomorrow, and we have, we're going to be going through, it's an extraordinary meeting for council. Councillor Patola, you could make a motion saying the 5 letters and that can be determined by staff, come back with a report or something like that and put that in. And we could do the motion tomorrow if that, table the motion. I'm just throwing it out there. I'm playing devil's advocate here. So, for him.
Thank you. I don't think we have to worry at all about slowing this process down. This is the part of the process that we want to get right. So if council would like an additional report with more information on options, then today is the time to do that. And the next readings and report can come forward in the future. We're in no urgent panic to pass this bylaw. So it's not time sensitive. We don't have to, if council wants more information, today is the time to do that. And there's no concern about the further readings and report coming to a future meeting. Councillor Douglas.
Thank you. I'd just like to add, and I really appreciate the words from my esteemed colleague, Councillor Patola, and that would be referring to you, Todd. Yeah. And I also really appreciate everybody else's input, and a few items that were mentioned there, Councillor Mealy's suggestion, and yourself, Mayor, you mentioned that this could be amended at any time. And Councillor Patola has put forward some suggestions of himself. And this brings me back to what I was trying to say earlier, was the notice of motion concept. The value in it is it allows council to look at a notice of motion, do some research, do some thinking, and and then follow it up at the following council meeting. And I really think we can move ahead on these, this bylaw at this point. I would like to. And I think the concerns that Councillor Patola and Councillor Mealy have suggested can easily be followed up as a notice of motion once you've had a little bit of time to reflect on it. And that's what I would really encourage us all to do right now. I would like to call for a vote on this. Well, not call for a vote. I would like to defeat this motion as much as I appreciate Councillor Patola's input. And I would like to move ahead with the second and third reading of the other bylaws. Thank you.
Thank you. So the motion is moved and seconded. Could I ask our corporate officer to reread what we currently have noted as the motion so that everyone on council is clear?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. So we currently have on the floor that council directs staff to bring council suggestions for how the public may have input into an opposed minor development variance.
Thank you. Councillor Patola, does that summarize what you were intending?
It does. I think it confabulates it a little bit because I both hummed and hawed. And I would remove the public have input, but that it read so that public can indicate opposition.
A mechanism for opposition effectively.
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
Is everyone on council clear on the motion? Okay. Then on the motion, all in favor? Opposed?
Opposed?
Thank you. Motion defeated. Okay, then we'll move on to B. Councillor Douglas, would you like to read this?
I'd like to make a motion that the City of Port Alberni Development Procedures Bylaw number 5076, 2023 be read a second time.
Thank you. Moved by Councillor Douglas, seconded by Councillor Mealy. Any comments on the motion? Seeing none on the motion, all in favor?
Yes.
Opposed? Carried. Thank you.
Thank you, and I'd like to make a motion that City of Port Alberni Development Procedures Bylaw number 5076, 2023 be read a third time.
Thank you. Moved by Councillor Douglas, seconded by Councillor Mealy. Any comments? Seeing none on the motion, all in favor?
Yes.
Opposed? Carried. Thank you, everyone. Item number 5, we have OCP and zoning bylaw amendments for 2846 4th Avenue.
Okay, thank you, Madam Mayor. Today for consideration, we have a development application at 2846 4th Avenue, and this is Official Community Plan Amendment Bylaw 5078 and Zoning Amendment Bylaw 5079. The applicant is Woodward's Village Incorporated. So the intent of the application is to enable a 4-unit townhouse at 2846 4th Avenue, and overall to create more opportunities for townhouse development in Port Alberni. And to start with the OCP amending bylaw, 5078, the intent is to change the land use of the property from general commercial to multifamily residential, and to add the property to development permit area number 1, multifamily residential, and then to add new townhouse design guidelines to the development permit area in the OCP. That is the permit area for multifamily buildings. The zoning amendment bylaw 5078 would add a new TH1 townhouse multifamily zone to the zoning bylaw as a standard general zone, and would rezone the property from its current zone of C7 core business to that TH1 townhouse multifamily zone. Here's the property you can see on this air photo. It's mid-block between Marr Street and Montrose Street. It is on the southern edge of the commercial neighborhood in what was formerly the parking lot of what I believe was the Woodward's department store. It is currently vacant and no longer being used for parking. And this application is fairly complex. So these two amendments, or these two amending bylaws, so it does deserve a bit of background information. The applicant who owns the property approached the city with a proposal to build housing. on this parcel, and that proposal would have required a rezoning. And the main issue at hand is that the current zoning bylaw regulations are not aligned with the dimensions of a lot of older properties within the Southport neighborhood. In particular, a lot of those historic lots from the early 1900s have a 44-foot by 125-foot frontage. And generally, those lot sizes and frontages are too small for our existing zoning bylaw regulations, which poses quite a strong barrier to new development on those parcels or infill development, particularly for new housing. So in total, in Port Alberni, there are 341 lots that have that 44-foot by 125 dimension, and 340 of them are within the Southport neighborhood, and 80 of those are within the Uptown district. So staff worked with the applicant to come up with options for moving forward with development of housing on this property. And the TH1 zone in particular is an option for a solution for other properties of those same dimensions in this neighborhood. In terms of the official community plan and the proposed amendments at this property, the applicant is proposing to change the designation of the property from general commercial to multifamily residential. And as you can see on the OCP map to the right, it is right on the edge of where that land use shifts from residential to commercial. And the official community plan does contain policy in section 4.3.4 with criteria for council to consider when redesignating land to multifamily. And the property should be within walking distance, at least 800 meters of commercial parks and services. It should be in proximity to major roadways, and it should form an adequate transition between lower density housing and there should be an adequate transition between lower density housing, and there should be compatibility with adjacent land uses. And staff have determined that these criteria have been met. The property is within 150 meters of the commercial neighborhood. It's a block off 3rd Avenue, which is an arterial roadway, and having sort of a lower density multifamily on the edge of a commercial on the edge of the residential neighborhood forms a good transition with that commercial neighborhood to the north. In terms of the zoning bylaw amendment, the applicant is proposing to change the zoning at this property from C7 to that TH1 zone. And the TH1 zone was designed specifically as an option for this property, as we mentioned, and for properties that meet those narrow dimensions in Southport. So staff support rezoning this lot, and just this lot, to TH1 because the location does support that walkability, and the extra residential density will benefit the Uptown neighborhood businesses. And the C7 zone isn't necessary to maintain in this particular location due to the amount of C7 land in the area and the small dimensions of the property and the fact that it is not near the main street. So the TH1 zone itself was based on the proposal submitted by the applicant for development on this property. They had their architect come up with a design, and then staff also looked at it, we tested it, we did research on best practices, and came up with a more general zone that could work on other properties as well. And the important thing to note is that the TH1 zone was designed to be compatible with single detached residential zoning. The massing of what you can build on this zone is really comparable to the R2 zone. And the zone itself, however, is flexible to allow other styles of townhouses. And if you look at the graphic in the top right of this slide, you can see the big yellow block is your maximum building volume on an R2 zoned property for single family. And then the TH1 build volume is that white cube perpendicular to the street. And the proposed development at 2846 4th Avenue, again, designed to meet the requirements of the TH1 zone. You can see a single townhouse building. This building that's being proposed is only 8.2 meters in height. And here's a quick site plan. Parking is accessed from the rear lane. You can see that on the left of the image. You can see the townhouses. The units face a central walkway. And there's actually a building planned for a second phase. We haven't received an application for this, but the intent is that there will be 2 buildings facing each other over a common space. So this application, like all of our applications, go to a staff development review committee where we get comments on infrastructure and servicing from other departments. In this case, staff have mentioned that laneway improvements may be required for that access and that parking. The engineering department supports parking access from the lane to the development. The walkway should be designed to permit emergency access, and the city will not be providing curbside waste collection because it is a multifamily development and a new hydrant may be required. And these are issues we've worked through with the applicant before bringing it to council, but there are some outstanding items like the hydrant that will be determined later with engineering help. In terms of communications, the Local Government Act, Section 475, does require the city to do some pre-engagement with the neighborhood in advance. And so the city mailed out 84 letters to occupiers and owners of property and received 4 responses back. There were a few in favor and a few against. The main issues raised by those who were opposed to the development, the big one was privacy fencing between the proposed townhouses and the neighbor directly to the south. And we have communicated this to the applicant, and they have confirmed that they will address this by adding fencing and screening during the development permit process. And there was also another issue raised about increased laneway activity and noise based on the development being accessed from the laneway. And just a reminder for council that the public hearing is required for this application because of the OCP amendment and rezoning. So in terms of staff's notes on this application, the application does meet OCP policy for redesignation of land as multifamily, and it aligns with the Uptown District Revitalization Strategy objectives for affordability and economic development. It aligns with Council's strategic priority, 512, of fostering a complete community through infill of vacant properties, and it aligns with the Provincial Homes for People Action Plan and forthcoming housing legislation. And this application and this townhouse zone will provide more missing middle housing in the community. Council's options are that bylaw 5078 and 5059 be read for a first time, and that the bylaws be also read for a second time, and that the amending bylaws be advanced to a public hearing on May 23rd. Or council may decline to give first reading, which means the application does not proceed, or council may provide alternate directions to staff by resolution. Staff recommend that amending bylaws 5078 and 5079 be given first and second reading, and that the amending bylaws be advanced to a public hearing. And I'm happy to answer any questions council may have. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Mealy.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, through you to our scene planner. Thank you for being here today. Appreciate it. Just so 2 questions. Well, first question actually was provided late in that, is that there is another development that will be happening north to that, or at least that is the feeling that a development will happen there. The second one is the garbage, no pickup. Are they going to be required to have a bin on the lot, or are they just going to be taking care of it and taking it to the landfill?
Go to our planner for those questions.
Through Madam Mayor to Councillor Mealy. Yes, the idea is that the applicant would have on-site waste collection services, and those would be done by a private contractor.
Thank you. Other questions from council? Councillor Douglas and then Councillor Patola.
Thank you. I know this is looking ahead, but you say there are plans. I suppose it would be jumping too far ahead to zone that one as well at this time, or enter it into that same process?
Through Madam Mayor to Councillor Douglas. So the applicant has plans to do another one on the neighboring parcel. We haven't received an application yet, but with this zone in place, they would be able to just apply to rezone to the TH1 zone and then proceed with development.
Thank you. Councillor Patola.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'd like to read the motion. That the official community plan amendment 2846 4th Avenue, bylaw number 5078, 2023, be now introduced and read a first time.
Thank you. Moved by Councillor Patola, seconded by Councillor Solda. Any comments? Seeing none on the motion, all in favor?
Yes.
Carried. Thank you.
Madam Mayor, I'd like to make a motion that zoning amendment 2846 4th Avenue, bylaw number 5079, 2023, be now introduced and read a first time.
Thank you. Moved by Councillor Patola, seconded by Councillor Solda. Any questions or comments on this one? Councillor, seeing none on the motion, all in favor?
Yes.
Carried. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Do you wish me to continue? Thank you. Make a motion that the official community plan amendment, 2846 4th Avenue, bylaw number 5078, 2023, be read a second time.
Thank you. Moved by Councillor Patola, seconded by Councillor Solda. Seeing no comments on the motion, all in favor?
Yes.
Carried. Thank you.
Madam Mayor, I'd like to make a motion that zoning amendment 2846 4th Avenue, bylaw number 5079, 2023, be read a second time.
Thank you. Moved by Councillor Patola, seconded by Councillor Solda. Seeing no comments on the motion, all in favor?
Yes.
Carried.
And Madam Mayor, I would like to make a motion that the amending bylaws numbers 5078 and 5079 be advanced to a public hearing on Tuesday, May 23, 2023 at 6 p.m.
Thank you. Moved by Councillor Patola, seconded by Councillor Mealy. Seeing no comments on that, all on the motion, all in favor?
Yes.
In favor. You're carried. Thank you. Okay, moving on. No correspondence for action today. Proclamations. We have one item, and that is a letter requesting that June 18th, 2023 be proclaimed as longest day of smiles in Port Alberni. Would somebody like to make that motion? Councillor Mealy.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I move that council proclaim June 18th, 2023 as longest day of smiles in Port Alberni.
Seconded by Councillor Dame. Seeing no comments on the motion, all in favor?
Yes.
Carried. Thank you. We'll move on to correspondence for information, and I will ask our corporate officer to summarize, including the late item.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. So we have 4 items and 1 late item on today's correspondence summary. The first being the Good Neighbor Agreement dated January 9th, 2023 between the city and the Salvation Army, particularly the Bread of Life Center. We have the correspondence from Cycle Alberni regarding the 10th Avenue and Dunbar Street proposed intersection improvements. We have a letter from Fallon Daffa regarding their 31st anniversary and asking that Mayor and Council send a greeting letter. And we have the minutes of March 1st from the Alberni Valley Museum and Heritage Commission minutes. And then we have the late item that Councillor Patola spoke to, which is the from Fortis BC that you may nominate a local charity or nonprofit organization deserving of a $15,000 donation, one of 3 awards.
Thank you very much. Any comments on the correspondence? Councillor Patola.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'd like to highlight the correspondence from Fortis BC. They offer 3 awards or grants yearly of $15,000 to not-for-profits or charities in our community. Well, they offer to all communities, but within the community. And to nominate a charity for this purpose, one must be a member of the Union of BC Municipalities, which as councillors we all are. And I would like to ask that we nominate the Canadian Mental Health Association for that award, and then we leave it up to that association to make the application. I would say that I sit on the board of that organization, so whilst it would be a conflict if we were awarding it, we're just allowing the nomination, and I would not make the nomination as part of council without consent of council. And I would certainly be open to any other nominations that any other councillor would present for consideration.
Thank you. Comments? Okay, and was that a motion to nominate?
If it's required to be a motion, yes. I mean, I don't think I'm asking council to nominate them. I'm asking permission as a member of UBCM, as a function of this council, to offer the nomination.
Okay. I haven't, because it was late correspondence, I haven't read specifically about the program if it needs to be a council resolution to nominate, or if they just need to put forward an application and have our endorsement once that nomination is put forward. I think there's certainly no harm in Canadian Mental Health Association putting in an application and us supporting that. However, I don't know, obviously, without an application coming before us, what that would be for. I think it's fantastic for us to extend this to all organizations in the community who may want to participate. Any nonprofit who wants to put forward an application, I would imagine, would likely get council's support for that, and I would imagine as well we don't have to limit ourselves to one. So, Mike, do you want to possibly speak to if we need a motion to nominate them, or if we can just welcome any organization to nominate and then look to support following?
Thank you. I didn't get a chance to review it either, as this is the first time I'm seeing it. What I would recommend is that administration look at the terms and conditions and summarize it for council and send it out as correspondence to council members, so you understand how a group would apply, how many apply, and if we need council resolutions, et cetera. And we can get that out probably the beginning of next week, if not later this week.
Thank you, and I do note that the deadline for submissions is May 14th, so we do have another council meeting prior to that. If a resolution of council or a UBCM member is required, then I think we could even have just a letter request from that organization included on our next agenda in order to formally support that. I think at this point it would be great if we could make sure that as many nonprofits in the community are aware as possible, so that we can get multiple submissions in for the community. Okay. And if you'd like to make any motion, you certainly can, and if not, then that's great for this item, I think.
No, I don't think so, but I'm glad that we can publicize it so that all the not-for-profits in our community could consider benefiting.
Absolutely. Thank you. Any other items councillors would like to speak to in correspondence? Okay. Seeing none, would somebody like to move receipt of our correspondence items A through E? Moved by Councillor Mealy, seconded by Councillor Dame. Seeing no comments on the motion, all in favor?
Yes.
Carried, thank you. We do have one item to report from in camera today, and I'll just ask our corporate officer to summarize it.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. So we're just summarizing that council release for public consumption, the sale of salvage materials, equipment, and structures from the SOMAS lands. So two separate companies, Canadian Mill Equipment Limited in the amount of $40,000 plus taxes, and Franklin Forest Products in the amount of $40,500 plus taxes, both companies being responsible for all demolition and transportation, related expenses, and in compliance with the city's safety, environmental, and other requirements.
Thank you very much. We will move on to council reports. Are there any items councillors would like to highlight today? Councillor Solda.
Madam Mayor, I was at the Rainbow Gardens monthly meeting, and I just wanted to report that they received $1 million from CMHA to mitigate rental for their mortgage. So the $1 million will go to the mortgage, and it will bring down the rent for senior housing. So I think that's a really positive thing, and they're going to be having on Aboriginal Day a big celebration for their new senior housing, and of course everybody will get an invitation. So I just wanted to report that. Thank you.
Thank you, and just clarifying that CMHC, not CMHA. They're too similar.
Okay.
Thank you, Councillor Solda. I appreciate that. Any other items councillors would like to highlight? Okay, wonderful. Then would somebody like to move approval of or receipt of our council reports?
Motion to receive, Madam Mayor.
Motion to receive from Councillor Mealy, seconded by Councillor Patola. On the motion, all in favor?
Yes.
Carried, thank you. We'll move on to new business, and item number 1 is from Councillor Douglas.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'd like to make a motion that council direct staff to consider incorporating community amenity contributions into standard practice, and if we can get a seconder, I could discuss it briefly.
I'll second.
Thank you. So at one of the recent housing conferences I was at, community amenity contributions, everybody kept referring to CACs, and I'd never actually stumbled into them before, and it turned out that they're becoming fairly well used, although still, new to us. And so I'd just really like us to look into it. I did talk to some members of a nearby community, Qualicum Beach, where they have been using them, apparently to quite great success. And the attractive thing about the CACs was, unlike the the other development, DCCs, the CACs are much more open to wider use within the community, be it for trails or waterfront development or all kinds of aspects open up to put that funding into those other projects as well, not strictly into infrastructure such as DCCs are directed at. So that's the idea behind this notice of motion, is that we, it quite possibly could something that we could look into, and particularly when we look at the developments that are coming up, the potentials on the SOMES lands and other waterfront lands. It could be something that's very important for us to look at to get additional revenue into the community, whether it's going towards a swimming pool, for example, or all kinds of amenities that we could put it towards. So I'd appreciate your consideration. Thank you.
Thank you, and just want to clarify, just because in a portion of that you did say notice of motion, but just for, of course, council's awareness and the public, this is a full motion now as it's written on the agenda, moved and seconded. Councillor Patola.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, and through you to Councillor Douglas. That's you, John.
Thank you.
I would make a motion to amend my friend's motion by deleting the phrase community amenity contributions and replace it with the phrase the provisions of the Local Government Act, Section 482.
Thank you. Is there a seconder for that? Seconded by Councillor Solda, and if you want to comment.
Thank you. Well, Section 482 is the section in the Local Government Act that authorizes the community amenity contributions, and it also, at the same time, authorizes other types of agreements with regards to density bonusing. The conditions that may be included under the subsection that allows density bonusing are conditions relating to conservation or provision of amenities, including the number, kind, and extent of amenities. So that would include parks or beaver ponds or trails, etc. Conditions relating to the provision of affordable and special needs housing, as such housing is defined in the bylaw, including the number, kind, and extent of the housing. And linked to that is a condition that the owner enter into a housing agreement under Section 483 before a building permit is issued in relation to property to which the condition applies. So the section in the LGA is a little bit more expansive than just the community amenity contributions, but I think that if we're making one amendment, because an amendment would be flowing from this eventually, we should make an amendment that encompasses as many powers as we are permitted by the province.
Thank you. So we do have a motion on the floor, moved and seconded. I just wanted to comment that the motion as a whole is council direct staff to consider incorporating. So there may not be any amendments to our bylaws or anything else as it is, because this is really just, I view it as a request for a staff report effectively. And the amendment is just broadening that out a bit, which I think is certainly wise, given that we want to make sure that if we don't want to go back and amend multiple times. So any comments from the original mover?
Thank you. I gather there's been a movement towards a friendly amendment to my motion. Is that correct?
It was moved and seconded, so we're considering it unfriendly. And I think that that's fine in this case. It's very specific rather than just wording. It does include more than you originally included. So I would say we should vote on this amendment.
Okay. Well, my motion was indicating community amenity contributions, and that's the sole concern of this motion that I've put forward.
Okay, so this amendment would change that, so it's not accepted as a friendly amendment. We are going to vote on it. So if that is outside of what you originally intended and you don't support it, you could certainly oppose the amendment.
Okay.
Other comments on the amendment for now? Councillor Dane.
Through you, Madam Mayor. I'm curious to know, Councillor Douglas, do you feel that this continues to reflect your original motion, or are you the intent of it anyways?
Well, the purpose, as I've said already in this meeting, of a notice of motion is that you get to study it and reflect on it and look at the implications. This is a new motion. My motion was a notice of motion, which I made at the last council meeting and that I intended to go ahead with today. This is changing that motion in a direction that I'm not familiar with.
Thank you. Other comments on the amendment? I'm just waiting to hear if Councillor Haggard has any comments. Councillor Haggard, go ahead if you do, and if not, we'll just continue on.
No comments at this time.
Thank you. Okay, sorry, Councillor Patola for final comment, and then we'll go to the vote on the amendment.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Yeah, it's unfortunate my friend's not familiar with it. I know that at conferences, people will pick up a certain topic or line of reasoning and really propound the benefits of that. It's unfortunate that whomever introduced this idea into my friend's vocabulary didn't simply read the very next section in the act. And from my reading and sometimes inaccurate legislative interpretation, but sometimes accurate, when there's a section that talks about powers and then there's a number of subsections under that, they're intended by the government that passes them, here the provincial enabling government, to be taken together as a group. They're in the basket. And certainly you can pick and choose out of the basket. I don't think that my amendment detracts whatsoever from my friend's request for report, essentially, as your worship has put it. I think it just adds to it that the whole section is fully considered at once instead of piecemeal over a number of years. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Mealy.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Perhaps I could ask the amender to put and/or the provisions of the LGA Section 42 after community amenity contribution, so it's all covered, and Councillor Douglas still has the intent of his motion.
I think we could consider that a friendly amendment.
I would certainly be accepting to that. It's doesn't change very much at all. It's redundant, but clarifying. Thank you.
Thank you. Fine with the mover and seconder. And I just want to comment before we vote on this amendment and then potentially on the amended or unamended motion, that I think sometimes it feels like we're going down a bit of a rabbit hole of being incredibly specific on some things where we're just asking for information from staff. We don't necessarily have to spend all of this time going back and forth on exact wording, because if our Director of Development Services is working on a report for us and he is the expert, he is at that point going to add into that report, most likely. There's these other options that we could add that are best practice in community as it is. So I appreciate the intent on both sides of this, but I think we don't have to try to be overly prescriptive when we're asking for just information from our staff. But I think the intent here, there's probably unanimity on how we would like to move forward, what we're looking for, and I think as a result of the discussion that we've had, we're going to end up getting the information explored that we are hoping for from our staff on this. So with that, I'm going to call the question on the amendment. All in favor?
Opposed.
Okay, thank you. Carried on the amendment, and then if there's no more questions on the actual motion, seeing none, I'll call the question on the motion as amended. All in favor?
Yes.
Carried. Thank you. Okay, and we'll move on to item number 2, prioritizing municipal input in future.
Madam Mayor, I had a notice of motion.
Oh, yeah, but we're still
little
on
further?
the
Okay.
written
Oh, sorry.
notice,
Okay,
written
thank
notice motions for now. You're actually number 4.
Okay. That's fine.
Thank you. So prioritizing municipal input for future RCMP contract policing decisions. And this was a notice of motion from Councillor Patola.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Please put your feet up and relax as I read the whole thing. Whereas the Government of Canada has made the decision in Budget 2023 to make municipalities responsible for all retroactive costs stemming from the latest RCMP collective bargaining agreement, and whereas these extraordinary one-time costs, which in some jurisdictions amount to millions of dollars, will cause significant hardship for communities and residents across the country, and were negotiated without meaningful consultation or a seat at the table for the municipalities responsible for paying the bill, and whereas municipal governments are already paying a growing share of policing costs, but unlike other orders of governance, cannot run deficits to spread out the impact of these extraordinary one-time sums and have limited revenue tools. And Whereas local governments will now be forced to make difficult decisions that will impact residents, such as cutting essential services, reducing policing levels, raising property taxes significantly, and/or canceling work on local infrastructure at a time when Canadians' concerns about community safety and the cost of living are already rising. And whereas going forward, it is critical that municipalities be proactively engaged in any forthcoming processes related to contract policing to prevent this occurring again. Therefore, be it resolved that the Council for the City of Port Alberni joins the Federation of Canadian Municipalities in calling on the federal government to commit to ensuring that local governments are meaningfully consulted, fully informed, and at the table on issues relating to policing costs, given the municipal role in keeping our communities safe, and be it further resolved that Council for the City of Port Alberni directs staff to prepare a letter as per the template provided by the Federation of Canadian Municipalities to convey this support in writing to local members of Parliament by May 1st, 2023. Ooh, that's soon.
Thank you. Moved by Councillor Patola, seconded by Councillor Solda. Are there any comments on this?
If I might speak to the motion, Madam Mayor. This was a motion not written by me, provided by UBCM, provided by FCM directly. So any of the conclusions therein were provided in the text already. But essentially, it goes towards the amount of retroactive policing costs that we had to pay. Luckily, Port Alberni, through the wisdom of the finance department and the previous council, had money set aside for that and saw it coming. But nonetheless, policing costs are growing, and I think adding our voice to that of FCM in this issue, certainly to be engaged with being able to control our policing costs to whatever extent we can, would be of benefit.
Absolutely, thank you. And I think important to note that the amount set aside was there, as a result of obviously good forethought. However, for years we were kind of given an amount that we should be budgeting for, and this amount, the amount that was actually ended up settling on, was far exceeded what we were as municipalities told to budget for. So this is an out of the norm cost. Also, just wanted to say I appreciate this motion very much, and I think it will serve us well as we, for several years, were the highest cost of policing per capita in the province outside of the city of Victoria. It was highest cost of policing per capita for RCMP communities, and Victoria, for some reason, was in that list and then removed. But we know that our RCMP costs are a challenge, and there's limited engagement with local governments. UBCM does a great job. FCM obviously is a great advocate. But at the end of the day, we just had a review of the Policing Act, and there's been very little action taken as a result of that. So adding our community's name to this list and reaching out to our MP, who is certainly very engaged in this already, but that would engage himself even further as a result of a letter from us asking for municipalities to be consulted, I think is a well-intended and will be well-received resolution. So I will call the question on the motion. All in favor?
Yes.
Carried. Thank you. I will... Next, I have, and I'm not going to make it a notice of motion, sorry about this, Councillor Douglas, because it is a topic that's already been discussed. I'm just going to ask for a report providing full information to Council on the status and project changes, as well as scope of work for the 10th Avenue and Dunbar project. If there's a seconder. Seconded by Councillor Solda. Go ahead.
Through the chair, I just want to clarify, are you also looking for the next steps and timelines where?
Yes, absolutely. Okay. So the full project scope, and if that's broken down into phases, certainly we want to see all of the phases. But what I'm most interested in is how that project, how we're going to achieve the original intent of the project and what that timeline will be.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so with that moved and seconded, I'm not seeing any further comments on the motion. All in favor?
Yes.
Carried, thank you. And I'll go to Councillor Solda for a notice of motion, I believe, on budget.
Yes, Madam Mayor, I have a notice of motion, and especially with the future of body cameras next coming from the RCMP. My notice of motion is that the surplus funds from 2022 be evenly split between the RCMP and the Parks and Rec reserves.
Thank you. So that's a notice of motion, and that will be noted on our agenda for our next council meeting where the surplus will be discussed as well. Any other items of new business today? Seeing none, we will move on to question period. This is an opportunity for members of the public to ask questions of council. Mr. Anderson.
Thank you. And ask some basic questions just for clarity in my own mind pertaining to some of the subjects that may be addressed in the next few months. Who do you include as a committee of the whole? I know the answer, but I just want to make sure that we're in agreement with this.
Committee of the
And I do have problems with how we conduct the committee of the
Sure.
wholes, but that's not the issue. that I'm
Committee of the
dealing with.
whole is every member of council.
Is it possible at times that other than members of council, others are part of that committee of the whole?
I would have to review our procedures bylaw to see if that is actually possible or not.
Okay, if you could do that, and no big rush on it. On the code of conduct, we, the city, hired a consultant from JB Consultants, Jerry Berry, who's no doubt set the guidelines and guided the council and staff through the process. Nothing against him, I don't even know him. But what was his qualifications? Because I'm reading this to do this job, basically.
Could our CAO speak to Jerry Berry?
I like the name.
Through the chair, I believe that Jerry Berry has extensive background in municipal government, acting as a CAO for many years and running a consultant business as well. Exactly what his credentials are beyond that, I don't have it at my fingertips. However, he will be here tomorrow at the Committee of Whole, and he will be here to answer questions of public and council.
Excellent. Yes, he worked for the city in Nanaimo for, I believe, 22 years, city manager, deputy city clerk, assistant city manager. So he worked in a number of high-profile positions in Nanaimo City. And it concerns me a little in this respect that he knows the needs and the wants of people, mayors and the city councils and all that, and how they have to sometimes deal with some very challenging and difficult questions put forward by the staff. And that certainly was an experience that both the people at this podium and city council have dealt with in the last 3 years. Caused some hardships, hard feelings. And so I can't help but think that Mr. Berry presented the views that were faced by city and city staff.
Mr. Anderson, do you have a question? I do have to ask that you ask a question during question period, and I also want to say that it's not, I think it's inappropriate to speculate on, especially prior to the session tomorrow, on what our consultant, who is a professional consultant, who is very well respected in the municipal world.
And why is it?
Sorry, I'm speaking right now, so I do need you to wait. I do think it's inappropriate to speculate on what he may have presented when we have an opportunity tomorrow to hear from him directly. He is a very well-respected person in the local government world, and we certainly could bring back more information on his experience with LGMA and other organizations as well, but I want to avoid speculating that he may have brought a slanted approach to this process. So continue on if you'd like.
Yes, I was not speculating. I was trying to get answers as to how, because when you hire someone, you look into their history. So I've got this, but we'll pass on that. I'm glad to hear that he's coming here. One of those moments. The workshop that was taking place on, I believe it's March 23rd, who attended that workshop? It's a legitimate question that should be answered without Mr. Berry being here.
Thank
He
you.
was there.
I believe all members of council, and correct me if I'm wrong, members of council, but I believe all members of council took part in that workshop, as well as our CAO, Director of Corporate Services, and our Deputy CAO.
Was there anyone, and I have to refer back, if I don't refer to some things, Madam Mayor, then my questions don't have a meaning. I brought up my concerns and I asked if there's going to be an opportunity for public input in the discussions leading up to the proposal. And it is a proposal, but it's a recommendation from the Committee of the Whole, who is City Council, to themselves. And so it's fairly going forward. So was there anyone at that March 23rd meeting representing the interests of the public, for example, coming up and bringing forward issues?
Each member of council represents the interests of the public, and tomorrow will be the opportunity for general members of the public to have input into this process. It is a recommendation, or recommendations that are coming forward tomorrow. It can absolutely be changed, and you have seen that things have come to Committee of the Whole that have then come to Council and been changed as a result of that public input.
And that does not preclude me asking these questions today. Those changes have not been, they're still under consideration. It's quite regular in these parts of the meetings to ask these questions.
I'm encouraging you to ask the questions.
I
I'm
know you're
answering them.
encouraging me, but it's not wrong for me to bring some of these things up, so I don't have to waste time if I want to bring up any issues tomorrow. So you're actually enacting the possible changes that will incur, meaning it could be a few weeks, it could be a few months, probably a few months, that I would be called out of order here for bringing any of this up because it isn't part of the agenda.
I just want to clarify that I wasn't suggesting you shouldn't bring these up today.
Okay.
You asked a question about if there was an opportunity for members of the public to provide input into that process, and I was answering that that opportunity is tomorrow.
Fair enough.
Not to say you can't bring them up today. I'm letting you know that we heard that request from you, and instead of bringing this from our workshop to specifically a council meeting for adoption, we added an additional step, and we are bringing it to a Committee of the Whole as a result of your request.
And so we agree that there's nothing illegal about me bringing this question up now. So my concern raised a few months back about public input, which I enjoyed the conversation about that earlier on the building thing. It was interesting, and I'm glad to hear that people are voicing their opinions on council. And so what has happened? And I don't mean Mr. Berry, because it's not really concerning him. It's an appropriate question. Why hasn't there been consultation with the general public as to how they feel and why at times they get so frustrated out of trying to get responses from City Council and staff? Isn't that part of the process that came in the guidelines set out by the municipalities? It included three parties. It included mayor council, it included staff, mostly I think they're referring to senior staff, and the public, consultation with the public. Where has consultation with the public come into the play at this point?
Each of us as councillors engage with the public on a regular basis. We've also had engagement at our council meetings. And additional to that, we are welcoming the public to come to that meeting tomorrow to shape what we may or may not adopt then as a council. So recognizing completely that you don't think that's the right process, that you would have liked that formal engagement with the public earlier. I certainly hear you on that. However, this is the process that council as a whole opted to go through. Now we are at the point in the process where we are asking the public to give input.
And at what part of the meeting tomorrow will public be presented a chance to speak?
Typically for Committee of the Wholes, we have our presentation or a report. Council will ask questions, and then there will be an opportunity for public questions.
So they don't have to wait until to the end of the meeting to ask these questions.
It would go, and I don't have the agenda for tomorrow in front of me, but
Well,
it
I
would
did
go
have it here, and
report,
there wasn't enough room.
council questions, members of the public.
Right, so just clarify, so the members of the public will have an opportunity other than question period to ask questions of Mr. Barry or whoever? Or will it be limited to question period? I don't have it in front of me either,
Yeah.
but you certainly should have.
There will be, well, I don't have it right now because I
Okay.
wasn't aware that you were getting up to ask questions on an agenda I don't have in front of me. But we will absolutely welcome members of the public up tomorrow after council asks their questions on this topic.
Besides question period, I just want to hear a yes or a no.
Yeah, can't answer that right now. So
can
if
answer
you
it.
if you could move on to your next question.
You can answer it. Anyway, I'll take that as whatever. Another thing it's on the committee of a whole. As we all agree, a committee of a whole cannot make motions. They can take the discussions that were talked about at the committee of a whole, and then they can present what resulted from those discussions at a council meeting. And yet they rephrase it and they say, we'll make recommendations, and recommendations are to adapt this preliminary report from the committee of the whole to themselves as a council. What's the difference between a recommendation and a motion? What is really the difference?
I would say that the intent, and I was the counselor who brought this forward to create the committee of the whole as a process for our community. The intent was to slow down the process. To council can make a recommendation, and council may then come back 2 weeks later and pass the recommendation that the committee of the whole made. However, the intent is to give it that opportunity for members of the public to give feedback, to come to council, to speak to councillors that they know. To talk about it on social media. It slows down that process by 2 weeks rather than something coming to council. What I saw happening frequently was something would come to council, council would debate it, vote on it, and it would be passed. And then following that, we would often, after the fact, hear input from members of the public. And in my experience, we had the odd thing where we would possibly want to reconsider then because we heard valuable input from the public. So this provides an opportunity to add 2 weeks to the process so that members of the public have the opportunity to give input.
My question was, and you've lost me a little bit there, but that's not, what is the difference between a recommendation and a motion? Very simple.
A recommendation goes to council to be voted on and endorsed.
And what does a motion do?
A motion, that's when we endorse it.
No, the motion comes prior to endorsements.
No, committee of the whole.
You make a motion and then you...
Mr. Anderson, you have to stop interrupting me.
Well, you're not answering my question again, Mayor Minions.
I am answering your question.
Can I explain one time?
I am answering your question. A recommendation is made by a committee of the whole, which absolutely is every member of this council. So I understand your point. However, it is non-binding. It comes to council after there's been an opportunity for members of the public to provide input, and then council is the one who will endorse that and pass the motion or not, and it has been changed in the past. That recommendation is not always endorsed. Council endorsing it makes it an actual motion that has been.
Other than the round the circle, it's the same as a motion. It's brought to the council will endorse or turn it down, and you by
Thank you,
voting
Mr. Anderson.
yes
Do you
or
have
no.
additional questions for question period today?
This is I got one other comment and a question for a response. I read this report, and I think there's one element that's left out in it. It takes into consideration the needs of city council. and how they can better manage their business without interruption from people such as myself. And I've acted sometimes in a way that I wish I hadn't, out of frustration. So this report deals with City Council, and it deals with staff. It doesn't deal with the needs of the public because there's been no consultation. I'm sorry, the day tomorrow, one day, this consultation should have taken long before this report was presented. Now, I'm not going to go any further, but every time I ask a question, you go around that circle and you confuse the issues more than you do to help. Why is the third party not part of these discussions? It's undemocratic, and in the long term, it's not going to be productive. Who cares what the other communities do? Can't we be better than some of them? And can we not put in conditions that enhance the opportunity of the public to speak? Isn't that a plus? We don't have to be consistent with everyone else. Anyway, thanks for listening to me. And I'm still a proponent of Code of Ethics, but not the way it's being written.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hopefully you'll hear more tomorrow, as I think there's some assumptions being made about what is being proposed or not, and you'll have the opportunity to ask your questions of council and our consultant tomorrow as well.
And I'm hoping there's a lot of people here.
Hopefully, yes.
An opportunity at times to ask questions.
Thank you.
That was part of the reason I thought I could get a few of them.
Are there other members of the public who would like to ask questions today?
Thank you.
Come on forward.
Hi, my name is Joseph Laskosic. I live here in Port Alberni, and thank you for sitting today and doing what you're doing. I have a question just to clarify from earlier during the meeting. There was a put forward about the trail, funding for the trail. Was it actually approved today to go ahead with that funding? Because I sort of got lost in things. So it was definitely
It's not
approved.
surprising that you got lost in things today.
Thank you.
Thank you for that question.
Yep.
So the third reading of the budget was passed, and in that third reading, the funds needed for that project were included. So fourth reading and final adoption of the budget is proposed to be passed tomorrow at 5:30, a special meeting that we probably have just posted notice of just within that 24-hour requirement. So that would be when that project is actually passed, when the budget itself is passed.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
So I have a couple questions, just quick questions. If everything goes through and it's all approved, is it likely that this project will be finished in the time span that it's allotted for in this year? Is everything in place to do that?
CAO, are you able to comment on that?
Through the chair, administration will make every effort to have the trail complete within those timeframes. We can't always predict what weather happens or other items may get in the way, but we are prepared to move forward with the project at this time.
Sounds good. So with that in mind, if it's not completed, does that affect the grant at all or not? As long as it started, is that sort of?
CEO.
Through the chair, I believe with most projects and grant projects, once they're started, we continually update the granting agency. So if there is something that is prohibiting us, we would confer with the granting agency, and if there was any changes to the funding source, we would come back and have that conversation with council at that time.
Sounds like it could be affected then if it's not completed.
I haven't seen a government agency, once something has been approved and is under construction, funding pulled back from it, because sometimes that may adversely affect. As this one was stated, there is some sloughing and fish habitat. If the project wasn't finished, it may adversely affect that. And where the partner in funding is another agency of the government, which would be concerned about other ramifications from the project, that I can't see them not continuing with the funding. However, it is in the grant that we're supposed to be done the project by March 31st, and that's what we're aiming for right now.
great. Thank you. Thank you for that clarification. And just to clarify, I haven't seen the map of the proposal for the actual. Now, is this going from the bottom of Gertrude up through underneath the trestle and up connecting to the trail system that basically starts up near Canadian Tire, goes down, if you were to draw a line straight down, would kind of end at Ian. It's sort of where it stops. Is that a continuation from that Roger Creek Trail down to the bottom to where Gertrude Park is?
It doesn't go all the way to Gertrude Park. The Key to Key project does tie into that park area, but it does connect to Roger Creek Park as it is. So it doesn't come all the way to Gertrude, but it goes a part of the way, and then the Key to Key would tie in the rest.
Okay, so it's nothing to do with that trail that's currently up Roger Creek that's currently up there. It's not connecting anything down
It
for.
connects further up,
up,
to
okay.
the Scott Kenny Trail system.
Perfect, excellent, good. Okay, thank you. Safety concerns, I know this is, I thought it was going to come all the way down, and eventually maybe it will. But safety concerns, I know, and I think, if I remember correctly, when the grant was applied for, there was a contingency that the city be involved in, I think, funding and the upkeep of that's supposed to be budgeted for in the budget for upkeep of that trail. Is that correct? That was part of the application or the approval of the grant was part of that the city would look after that in their budget. Is that correct?
CAO.
Through the chair, whenever a capital project is budgeted for, we do have to update our operating budgets to make sure that the safety and the integrity of the item is maintained.
Yep, perfect, thank you. And just one last thing, safety concerns. I was up at the Fall Fair and talked to somebody involved in security. I love our trail systems. I'm all for trails. I use them a lot. Proximity to different things creates its own issues. And so when I was talking to somebody that was involved in security at the fair, Fall Fair, there was a mention some of them weren't that positive regarding the trail system that's currently, I love the trail system. I love our trails everywhere. But there was a concern that they were concerned, and I didn't agree with them, but maybe he had a valid point. He says, we're concerned that the extra traffic and things happening down in the Roger Creek area is contributing perhaps to some of the vandalism that's taken place on the Fall Fairground. So is that of concern at all with the building of our great trail system?
Thank you for that. And I know that the trail system, the Scott Kenny Trail, does already go into the Fall Fairground. So if nothing else, I would say this would probably add more members of the public to it. But I think that's a great concern to bring forward, and we can certainly have our Director of Parks, Recreation and Heritage connect on that with the Fall Fair Association, just to see if there's mitigating opportunities there.
Perfect. Okay, thank you for your time. Thank you.
Okay.
Sorry, Madam Mayor, just in that conversation, perhaps involve the RCMP as well, as they would probably have knowledge of what's going on down there. Thank you.
Thank you. With that, would somebody like to move adjournment? Moved by Councillor Mealy, seconded by Councillor Patola. All in favor? Anyone in favor? Nobody even put their hand up for in favor on adjournment. Carried.